I, 28 male, came here from Eastern Europe at 19 with 2 suitcases, broken English, and nothing else. I'm a software engineer now. I speak 3 languages. And, yeah, I have an accent. It's not thick, it's not incomprehensible, but it's there. A slight roll on certain consonants, a rhythm that gives me away within 30 seconds of opening my mouth. I used to be self-conscious about it. Years of being the foreign kid at work, at parties, in grad school, you either let it break you or you build armor around it. I built armor. My fiancée and I had been together 2 years before she showed me who she really was. She came from old money, not the kind that works for it, the kind that inherits it and forgets where it came from. Her family had a name in their Connecticut social circle. Country clubs, charity galas, very quiet and very cutting judgments delivered over expensive wine. I should have seen the signs earlier. Looking back, they were everywhere. The dinner was her idea. Her parents were visiting from Connecticut and she wanted to do a proper family dinner at this upscale Italian restaurant downtown. White tablecloths, sommelier, the whole performance. I wore a suit. I brought flowers for her mother. I was, by any measure, on my best behavior. Her father spent the first 20 minutes asking me pointed questions about my career trajectory in a tone that suggested software engineering was something I'd stumbled into accidentally. Her mother smiled the smile of someone who has perfected polite disapproval into an art form. I answered every question directly, confidently, without flinching. Then the conversation shifted to a client call I'd had that week with a European partner. Her father asked me to explain the technical side of what I did. So I did. I explained the architecture, the problem we solved, the outcome. I was mid-sentence when my fiancée, without looking up from her menu, said it. Your accent is so embarrassing. Can you just talk normal? The table went quiet. Not dramatic movie quiet. Actual quiet. Her father stopped mid-sip. Her mother's smile froze. The waiter, who had been approaching, slowed his steps. Something cold moved through my chest. Not hurt exactly. More like clarity. The kind that arrives when something you suspected gets confirmed in the worst possible way. I looked at her. She was still looking at her menu like she'd said something completely reasonable. Like she'd asked me to pass the bread. I set down my fork, straightened my jacket, and said, in the clearest, most measured English I have ever spoken in my life, I'll work on it. She looked up then. Something in my tone made her look up. But I had already turned back to her father and finished my sentence, in English, wrapping up the technical explanation cleanly and professionally, like nothing had happened. And then when the waiter came to take our orders, I ordered in my native language. Not loudly. Not performatively. I simply switched. Ordered my food in the language I grew up speaking, the language my grandmother taught me at her kitchen table, the language I dream in when I'm exhausted. The waiter paused for exactly 1 second, then recovered and said in English, Of course, sir. My fiancée stared at me. I smiled at her mother and asked in English whether she'd been to this restaurant before. Her mother answered, slightly bewildered but politely. And then when my fiancée tried to pull me into a side conversation, her voice low and tense, I responded in my native language. Pleasantly, without aggression, just in my language. What are you doing? She whispered in English. I replied in my native language. Kept my tone light, conversational, like I was talking about the weather. Her father watched this with what I can only describe as poorly concealed fascination. Her mother had gone very still. My fiancé's face moved through several stages, confusion, irritation, and then when she realized the couple at the next table had glanced over, when she realized the waiter was carefully not making eye contact, when she realized that every single word coming out of her fiancé's mouth was completely incomprehensible to her, something that looked very much like humiliation. Which was the point. She had made me feel 2 inches tall in front of her parents. Over something I cannot change, and would not change even if I could. And I wanted her just for one meal, to understand what that felt like. To sit at a table and not understand a single word being spoken around you. To smile and nod and feel completely outside. She excused herself to the bathroom after the appetizers and was gone for 11 minutes. Her father used the time to ask me, in a quieter and different tone, where I was from originally. Not the pointed version of the question. The curious one. I told him. He asked about my family. I told him about my parents still back home, about how my mother cried the first time she heard my American colleagues on a video call because she said it meant I had made it somewhere real. He didn't say anything to that, but something shifted in his expression. When my fiancée came back, her eyes were slightly red. She sat down and said quietly, "Can we please just have a normal dinner?" "Of course," I said, in English. And I said nothing else in my native language for the rest of the meal. I didn't need to. The message had already landed. Now here's where the story gets interesting, because that dinner wasn't even close to the end of it. 2 days later, I was back home, and the tension between us had settled into something cold and unspoken. I was looking for a pen in the junk drawer of her desk. She'd asked me to mail a bill while she was at the gym, and I found a folded piece of paper tucked under her planner. I almost didn't open it. I wish I could say I respected her privacy and put it back. I didn't. The corner was visible enough that I could see my name on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it. It was a letter, handwritten, 3 paragraphs, from her mother, dated 3 weeks before the dinner. 3 weeks. Meaning her mother had written this before the restaurant, before the embarrassing accent comment, before any of it. The dinner hadn't been a spontaneous cruelty. It had been a coordinated one. The letter said, in polished, careful language, that her mother was concerned about the long-term trajectory of our relationship, that she worried her daughter was compromising her standards by committing to someone who would never fully assimilate, that the accent was just a symptom of a larger incompatibility. And then the part that made my jaw tighten. She suggested that if my fiancé truly wanted the family's support for the wedding, she needed to address these concerns directly before the engagement went any further. Address these concerns directly. Her daughter had taken that instruction and delivered it at a dinner table in front of a waiter and a sommelier and a couple at the next table. I folded the letter exactly as I'd found it, put it back under the planner, mailed the bill, and when she came home I made coffee, handed her a cup, and said nothing. I needed to think. Our engagement was 7 months old. We'd put a $4,000 deposit on a venue, split evenly. We'd sent save the dates. We were 4 months from a wedding that her family had apparently been quietly lobbying against since before the ink dried on the ring. And my fiancé, rather than defending me, had followed her mother's playbook and executed it at dinner like homework. I needed to know how deep this went. So for the next 2 weeks, I was the perfect fiancé, warm, engaged, helpful, present. And while I did that, I listened. I noticed the way she'd lower her voice when her mother called. I tracked the small inconsistencies. Then, 10 days after I found the letter, she left her email open on the shared computer in the home office. I read it. There was a thread between her and her mother going back for months. 4 months of documented conversation about me, about my background, about my family's financial situation, which her mother had apparently researched, about whether my immigrant mentality, her mother's phrase, used twice, would be compatible with the family's social obligations. But the email that stopped me cold was one my fiancée had sent herself. Not to her mother, to a wedding planner, asking about the cancellation policy on our venue deposit. Dated 6 days before she casually told me over dinner that she thought we should postpone the wedding. I closed the laptop, sat back, and made a decision. Not a reckless one, a calculated one. I called my immigration attorney. I'd kept her on retainer since getting my work visa. My green card application was in process, sponsored through my employer, entirely independent of my relationship status. That was the first thing I needed to confirm. Good. Then I looked closely at our venue contract. It had a specific clause. If one party could demonstrate that the other had initiated cancellation proceedings without mutual consent, the initiating party was liable for the full deposit loss. I had a photographed email showing my fiancé had contacted the venue about cancellation 6 days before mentioning postponing to me. I went to the venue coordinator alone and showed them the email. Their legal contact reviewed it and came back within 48 hours. Their determination, My fiancé had made unilateral contact regarding cancellation without my knowledge. Under the contract terms, the deposit liability shifted. My $2,000 would be returned. Hers would not. That was step 1. Step 2 involved her mother's social circle, and I want to be clear, I didn't engineer this part. I simply introduced truth to the right place and let it travel on its own. My fiancé had a cousin in the family who had always been decent to me. At a Christmas gathering the year before, he'd pulled me aside and said quietly that he thought I was the best thing that had happened to this family in years. I reached out to him, and we had coffee. I told him what had happened at the dinner. I showed him the photograph letter and the email thread. I didn't editorialize. I just laid it out and let him read. He read it twice. Then he looked up and said, "She said that to you at the table, in front of my aunt and uncle." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry. That's not acceptable." I thanked him and left. I let him carry that information back into the family circle himself, because those circles are small and they echo. Meanwhile, my fiancé had come to me with the postponed conversation, completely casual, over dinner, framing it as needing more time to plan. I nodded and said we should sort out the logistics. She looked relieved, like she'd expected a fight and gotten compliance. 3 days later, I left her a handwritten letter on the kitchen counter. Same format her mother had used, 3 paragraphs, composed and clear. I told her I had found her mother's letter. I told her I had seen the email thread. I told her I had watched her spend 2 weeks pretending nothing had changed while quietly laying the groundwork to end our engagement on terms that protected her and discarded me. I told her that the accent she found embarrassing was the sound of every hour I had spent learning a language that wasn't mine so I could build something in a country that didn't owe me anything. That I had worked harder to belong in rooms she walked into by birthright than she would ever have to work for anything in her life. Then I told her we were done. Not postponed. Done. I had already moved my documents, laptop, and a box of personal items to my friend's apartment the day before. I walked out on a Tuesday morning while she was in the shower. The door closed behind me with no drama. Just the quiet click of a latch. The venue deposit resolution came through formally about 3 weeks after I left. My $2,000 was returned by check. My fiancé received written notice that her $2,000 was forfeited under the contract terms. I wasn't there when she got that notice. What I did know was that she had retained a lawyer who sent me a letter claiming I had improperly influenced the venue's determination and requesting I return the deposit funds as a condition of amicable resolution. I forwarded it to my own attorney. Her response was brief and clear. The venue had made their determination independently based on their own contract and documentation. I had provided factual information relevant to a financial matter I was a direct party to. There was no legal basis for the request. Their lawyer did not write back. But her mother wasn't finished. About a month after the lawyer letter went nowhere, I got a call from my employer's HR department. An anonymous complaint had been filed suggesting I had behaved in a threatening and intimidating manner toward a former personal contact, and that the company should review my conduct. I sat in that HR meeting with my hands folded on the table and told them everything. The full timeline. The dinner. The letter. The emails. The voicemails my fiancé had left after her father confronted her. 7 calls in 90 minutes, which I played directly from my phone in that conference room. The lawyer letter. All of it documented and in sequence. The HR director listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Is there anything you'd like us to do on your behalf?" "I'd like the complaint noted as unsubstantiated in my file," I said. "And the documentation attached, so the full context is on record." "That's reasonable," she said. The complaint was closed as baseless. But now I had a formal HR record documenting the entire situation from my perspective, attached to an unsubstantiated claim from an anonymous source. If anyone tried to use my workplace against me again, they'd find the ground there already prepared. The HR move was what finally broke something open in the family, because it was too far. The father had apparently been quietly mortified since the cousin's call, slowly doing the math on everything his wife had been orchestrating. But filing a complaint designed to threaten someone's livelihood, that was the calculation that finally produced a result he couldn't rationalize away. He confronted her directly, told her she had taken a family matter and turned it into something that could have destroyed a man's career. That there was no version of protecting our daughter that justified that. That he was embarrassed, and that she would not be making any further contact with me in any form. She didn't. Her position as committee chair at the nonprofit she sat on was quietly restructured shortly after. Not a public removal. Just a gentle repositioning that people in those circles understand immediately for what it is. The board position was filled within a month. I felt nothing particular about that. It was simply the natural result of her own documented behavior reaching people who had reason to care about it. The cousin told me the father had also sent something to me directly, a card, handwritten, mailed to my work address, which meant he'd made an effort to find it. It said, he owed me an apology for what happened at that dinner and for what followed. That I had conducted myself with more integrity than anyone in his family had. That he was sorry. 3 sentences. No excess. Just accountability, delivered plainly. I put it in the same folder as everything else and never responded. Not out of coldness. I just didn't know what to add to 3 sentences that had already said everything necessary. My fiancée called me one final time about 6 weeks after I left. I answered. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I didn't know about the employer complaint. I want you to know that. Okay, I said. I'm sorry. About the dinner. About all of it. I should have told her to stop. I should have defended you. I believed her. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who has argued with themselves about something so many times the argument is finished. I know, I said. Is there anything? No, I said. Gently but clearly. There isn't. A pause. Then, your English was never the problem. I know that now. I think I knew it then too. Take care of yourself, I said. And I hung up. I moved into my own apartment shortly after. 3rd floor, big windows, a view of the city that reminded me why I came here in the first place. My green card application progressed on schedule, untouched by everything that had happened. My $2,000 was back in my account. My HR file was clean with full context attached. My grandmother used to say, in the language I apparently speak too loudly in restaurants, a person who is ashamed of where they come from has already lost the most important thing they own. My accent is 9 years of work. It is the language my grandmother taught me, and every hour I spent learning a second one, and then a third. It is my mother crying on a video call because she said it meant I had made it somewhere real. It is every room I walked into where I was the only person who had earned their place the hard way. No one gets to find that embarrassing. Not at my table. If this story hit home and you want to be there when the next one drops, subscribe. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the most unbelievable stories are always the ones that actually happened.